So, how many people like historic buildings in this room? All right, good. This is a good crowd now. This is my kind of crowd, right? You know, it's sad, right, that you have to ask that question, but you do. I mean, because, you know, sometimes they call us the hysterical preservationists, right? And things like that. And it's good to really see this return in Florida and other places too, to the value in appreciating historic places and historic buildings. And not every community is St. Augustine or Key West or Coral Gables, you know, so sometimes we only have one building or two or three, or just, you know, a piece of a building like this beautiful structure here that it's built, you know, where there was a historic building here, and it's doing such homage because I would imagine it was built 5 or 10 years ago, Tom, something like that. How many years? 2010. So in 42 years, it'll be eligible for a historic building. And I say that seriously because the state of affairs is terrible today in architecture and in urban design. We're not building good things anymore. We're building throwaway buildings, buildings that are just done for 20 years. Think of your public store in your neighborhood where they built it 20 years ago and now they're tearing it down and building a bigger one. And everything is throwaway, particularly in Florida where very few people have a sense of place, a sense of memory, a sense of growing up. I grew up in Miami and I also grew up in Central America, so it was great to see how different places, you know, evolve over time. And I love doing this in Florida. I've been doing this now 30 years. My dad is semi-retired. He still comes in the office. He's 83 and very active. And we have a nice office too, because we have people that believe in preserving buildings and building new buildings, following the traditions of historic buildings like this fabulous building over here. So congratulations to Martin County and to Jensen Beach. And what a lovely town. One of my other fun things is topography. I like places that have topography. I was so excited when I drove up with Brigitte. I go, oh my God, there's a hill there, hill over there. Wow, there's so many things going on. And the waterfront, right? You just take that drive there and you see the waterfront over there. And it's so beautiful, this little downtown. What a jewel that you have here. Don't let them tear it apart. So I do have a lot of examples. I might have too many examples, so I might be a little bit lengthy. But this lecture is based on one that I gave in Bogota, in Colombia last September, to 800 students at a university, Piloto University. And it was amazing after the lecture over there that the kids from the university, the younger ones, the freshmen, the sophomores, were like, how do you do historic preservation? And I'm like, my God, you know, you have so much more than we do. And they don't have a national trust for historic preservation in Colombia. They don't have a Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. They don't have a Florida Historical Commission for Preservation. They don't have, you know, all the other things that we do already. So we're pretty much ahead of the ball game than our friends to the south, and I'm hoping with dialogue with the University of Florida and with other people that we can help other beautiful places like Colombia and someday Cuba and other places to do that, to preserve and have a trust, a fund that can help preserve their places. The bulk of my presentation is on Palm Beach County. I have 8 projects to show you there. 4 that have been built and 4 that are either in the design development phase or have started construction, which is always exciting to see construction. And then we were very fortunate last year working with Nancy and with Hank and with Jeff Harden here in town, Stratican Construction, on the old high school in downtown Stewart. And I spent a couple of weekends here as recently as Christmas Day and a couple of days in your beautiful downtown in Stewart. And so we have some, we'll show you that. That's the very last example. And as Michael mentioned too, last week we were working with Treasure Coast, and it was really exciting for me because it was about transit-oriented development, the TODs, which are really an important thing in Florida now that rail is coming back, and their commuter train stations that Michael and his team are trying to design to help some of these places get away from automobiles, you know. And when you see a place like North Miami Beach, where the intersection has, where's Kim, 18 lanes or 42 at the intersection, right on 163rd and Biscayne Boulevard. that's not a way to live. You know, that's just not a way to live. You know, 2 lanes. You know, this street, this is the way to live. You know, so and then each one of these projects is about how these buildings have helped an area or a neighborhood, and how they give them a real, not a sense of place. When we finished the HARRIET at City Place, the ULI, the Urban Land Institute, called it the heart and soul of City Place, of West Palm Beach. And somebody just recently mentioned the heart and soul of the courthouse in West Palm, and I kind of chuckled because I like that people are starting to think of their historic buildings as the heart and soul of their communities. We have a lot of change, right? And historic places have to change, by the way. The first example, Mar-A-Lago, is about a place that had to change to survive. And if it's not economically viable, then we're wasting our time. We have to find, it's a very important trend now in preservation, to do projects that are economically viable. In other words, the house museums that we've known for the last 100 years is not a economically viable model anymore. They're just, so it has to be the house museum that happens to have a cafe or a shop or a different activity attached to it, you know, so that it can create economic opportunity, stabilization with the building, and then also for the neighborhood, whether it's a new infill neighborhood or it's a historic neighborhood. So anyways, there are going to be 10 cases. A little bit on our company. We are 30 years this spring, and we're in downtown West Palm Beach on Clematis Street. And we do architecture, we help with community planning, we do interiors. Construction is always important. Architects should always be involved with construction and assistance, and historic and grants assistance too, you know. So 3 parts to the project and to the process. The first part, Mar-A-Lago in Palm Beach, built in 1927. The HARRIET HIMMEL, 1926 in downtown West Palm Beach. The 1916 Palm Beach County Courthouse, which is a miracle project. It's probably the highlight of my career, to be honest with you. In 30 years, I think that's the one. And the Lake Worth Beach Casino, which was a historic reconstruction. Interesting little side story on that one. Okay, so starting with Mar-A-Lago, and I have a lot of pictures, so I'll try to go through it really quickly, and there's a clock here, so that's really helpful. So Mar-A-Lago anchors the southern part of Palm Beach. In fact, when it was built, it was a jungle. It was really the boonies of Palm Beach and West Palm Beach. I have a map in my office, a 1907 map that shows the island and West Palm Beach. It was actually known as a community around the lake. And if you've ever met John Blades from the Flagler Museum or Harvey Oyer, both experts in history in Palm Beach County, they'll both agree with me that those 2 communities started as one community around the lake. It was politics that eventually split West Palm Beach from Palm Beach, but they all lived and thrived around that lake. And at the bottom of that lake was this wilderness where Mar-A-Lago was built, the Bath and Tennis Club, for many, many decades, and then housing the suburbs of Palm Beach eventually came south, you know. Today it's kind of funny because there aren't, it's now part of a very historic area that's grown quite well over time. This is a recent picture from the west. Mar-A-Lago means ocean to lake, so this is the lake view. And we've worked for the Trump organization for 20 years, 22 years till last year when we built the helipad, which is that little circle there. That was the last project. But the architect, Joseph Urban from Vienna, an amazingly talented architect, turn-of-the-century architect, believed that public spaces were very, very important, and they had to be designed in a complete environment. He was actually well known as an architect, but more as a theatrical designer. So if you've ever been to Mar-A-Lago, and these pictures will give you a sense of Mar-A-Lago, everything's about theater, everything's about the enjoyment of the place, the aesthetics of the place, and making sure that it was something that was dramatic, leaving a legacy. Yes?
Is it still $200,000 to join?
I don't know what the memberships cost are, but I think they're up in that range, yeah. Mr. Urban designed in 3 years 3 of the most important historic buildings in Palm Beach. The Bath and Tennis Club was the first project that he built just to the south of Mar-A-Lago. The Paramount Theater, beautiful theater, a lot of historic films filmed there in the downtown section of Palm Beach in 1926. and the Mar-A-Lago Club in 1927. The New School for Social Research, I put this one in here, was built in 1930, but if you see the aesthetics, it's really a modern or art moderne style. And having researched Mr. Urban for other lectures to the AIA just on him and his work, he was incredibly eclectic. You know, today architects get stuck in, this one company designs schools, this one designs hospitals. They all do just modern, or they all just do this. And what I loved about Joseph Urban, and Vlad and I researched him, my associate in design, the more we dug into him, the more we just found out that he was just a wow architect, because he was very eclectic. He could design something like Mar-A-Lago, and then he could do a very, very modern building, you know, all within a couple of years in between his practice. This is Mar-A-Lago when it was in the jungle. It still wasn't an anchor, it was just sitting there by itself. And here's the floor plans. Beautiful design based on the hill. He placed it like these hills over here. It sits right on the coastal ridge, and there's a huge drop. There's an entire basement underneath this first floor plan, and there's a patio, a circular patio with a cloister. And then from there, the building spins off in angles. So the first, I don't have a clicker over here. I think maybe, does this show up there? No. Can you see this? Yes, it does, right? Oh, good. Right, so that's actually President Trump's suite right there. This was Mrs. Meriwether Post's suite. The living room, the dining room, kitchen and staff, all back here. Okay? And then all the suites upstairs, all the private rooms over here, and staff rooms. Here's some pictures, some historical pictures of Mar-A-Lago when it was built. She hired over 600 people as the Depression was nearing here. She was in herself an enterprise to keep people working as times were getting tough in the late 20s. Here's some more pictures from the period. These are some drawings. These are some actual drawings on the left there, on my left, of the building from the west side looking east. And here's some photos of it today, looking upper corner from the ocean, looking towards the lake in the back, and on the corner from the Bath and Tennis, looking towards the north. And you can see downtown West Palm Beach on the horizon there. I've been going there 22 years, and I never, ever get bored of going there. I always see something new. How many times do we say that of a glass building or of a strip shopping center? Right? I mean, you see it one time and you're done looking at it. Not with this building. This is great property. It was voted one of the #1 historic building in the state of Florida by a poll that the AIA did a couple of years ago. And the detailings, I mean, they carved, you know, the designing in the classical styles, but with Venetian and Moroccan and Spanish, and blending all sorts of details into the carvatures. If you see the Capitol there, two men looking at each other, you know, and there's birds and there's parrots and there's all sorts of design elements of nature, because it was a wild place. It was 1920s, and it was in a wilderness. This is Mrs. Post's bedroom. It looks very close to that now. The interiors have not been changed. They've all been kept. The bed has been changed because their son, the young man, lives there now. So the bed is gone, but the decorative treatments on the walls are all there. This is a photo of the living room. And the site plan that we did, this is the overall site plan. So when we do work in preservation, you know, and work across the state of Florida and work with different communities, you know, we had in the past this idea that we had to stay rigid when we're doing historic preservation. And really, in this decade, to save buildings, to be able to repurpose them, we have to say the contrary. We have to say historic places change over time. And then the next sentence should be, it's up to us how we let that change occur. So we need to drive the bus, right? So that, is it a good change or is it a bad change? Is it a change that can allow the property to survive? Mar-A-Lago was empty for over 10 years. Mar-A-Lago was going to be subdivided into 12 McMansion estates around it until Mr. Trump bought it in the early 80s. It was a dinosaur. The federal government did not want the building. The state of Florida said, no way, we don't want the building either. The town of Palm Beach said, no way. And by then, the Post family was like, well, we don't know what to do with it either. You know, so luckily, the town had an approval for a subdivision of 12 estates with a developer from Texas who went bankrupt in the early 80s. And that's when Trump picked it up and did what he did over the last several years. We've done the beach area. Let me see if I can find where did the little thing go? The tennis club was one of the first projects 20 years ago on the southwest corner. The beach area in 2002, we had to work with a national trust. The four corners of the two new buildings, we had to put up flagpoles 30 feet high with red banners because they wanted to look at the view from the main glass window in Mar-A-Lago to make sure that the vista was protected. The building, there's an easement on the vista of the building, so the separation of the new buildings was of such nature that it would not compromise that vista of the building. These are some of the elevations. These are drawings by my dad over here, by the way. And the floor plans with the cabanas and a small grill. And here it is today. So, of course, he built a very large swimming pool, right? The biggest swimming pool in Palm Beach, in that vista space. So, you know, it made it a really nice opportunity next to the ocean for the cabanas. Some of the cabanas. Some more views. So we use elements of the historic design, but we interpret it in a new and a different manner. The same thing with the ballroom. The ballroom, there used to be a tent at Mar-A-Lago. For many, many years there was a tent. It wasn't very efficient. The planes would go over, it was very loud. So we took 3 years working with the National Trust, going up to Washington, and where do you put a big building? On a site, you know, so it's a pretty big building, right? It's a ballroom for 800 people. So finally they agreed to this spot, which is a low spot on the property, behind what's called a tree line. There's a tree line over here. I lost my little, oh, here we go. You see that tree line right there? So that is like this is when it was first finished, so it's not as thick as it is now. So that tree line hides the building from the historic estate. So it serves a purpose, but it's secondary in nature. It doesn't overwhelm the historic building. A lot of times today, we'll see in places, I'm doing a project in Delray Beach, and they'll have a historic building, and they've approved a building 4 times the size of the historic building, and that completely overwhelms the historic structure. So finding the right location and size, secondary size for new buildings on a historic campus is also very, very, very important. Here's some construction pictures. These are some details that my dad used. You looking at historic Mar-A-Lago and seeing how it could be applied to the new building. The courthouse is in downtown West Palm Beach. It's been considered probably one of the most important historic buildings in the state after the Capitol in Tallahassee. Very similar situation. The Capitol was going to be demolished. This building was going to be demolished. They had bigger plans, right? They built the Ed Durrell Stone large Capitol that we all know. And they were going to demolish the Capitol until some preservationists that I know in Tallahassee bolted themselves to the building, and they stopped the demolition process of that in the early 70s. And luckily for us today, we have the Florida History Museum. Wonderful use of that building. It's where everything happens. One of the most impressive photos I've seen just 3 weeks ago, when all the kids were up there marching from Parkland, someone took a picture from the colonnade, the portico, looking down through the portico at thousands of kids in that courtyard. It was amazing to see a picture anchored by our historical building from the most oddest, location, filming a very special event. These kids, going all the way up there to protest. The courthouse anchors the government area, government center of West Palm Beach. That's where Palm Beach County has their offices. The city of West Palm Beach, the state government, the federal government, they're all within a couple of blocks of this site. And so bringing it back was really a joy because this area of town needed an injection like that, needed something like that with a historic building. This is the original site plan. And you see all that green there. There was a big building that was there beforehand. So it was great to be able to do a site plan that not only brought back the historic building, but the other part of historic preservation, which is very important, the historic setting. Being able to reconstruct a setting that had disappeared because they had a very large structure, and bringing that setting is just as important with the landscape, with the hardscape, just as important as restoring the historic building. These are pictures. It was built in 1916. I do a walking tour in West Palm Beach, and we started the courthouse at the fountain on Clematis. And when we start the walking tour, I like to talk about, well, who lived here in 1916? It had been 7 years since Palm Beach County broke away from Dade County. We were part of a big county. This sliver of land, which is what it is, it's about 10 miles wide from the ocean to the Everglades, and it's about 100 miles long, right? It's, if you go Jupiter, right, because you have a lot of nature before you hit Hope Sound. So let's say Jupiter to Homestead. And there might have been 1,000, 2,000 people, you know, and now we have over 6 million people. I think it's over 6, right? 6 million, that's a lot of people. And I've been doing that walking tour for 17 years, and I always ask, does anybody know another place on this planet, I used to say in the United States, on this planet that has grown so much in such a short period of time, in such a small area of space? And nobody, I don't know if anybody knows of a place, you know, maybe some Chinese places real soon, right? But it's amazing that they were able to build this building in that period of time when there were so few people in South Florida and Palm Beach County. Because they built things to last back then. You know, that's the other thing. These buildings were very, very well built. People spent hurricanes in these buildings. It was such a respected building that just a couple years later, in 1927, the county, right, was growing leaps and bounds. They said, well, let's do another building, but let's do a mirror image. So they took the I of the 1916 building and connected it with the T of the 1927, creating an H building. And look at it right there, both of them identical. You know, very, very little change between one and the other, but beautiful neoclassical, timeless architecture. And this is what they did to it in 1972. So, that's the most polite word I could come up with, modern wrap-up 1972. But if you look at the upper picture, and I'm trying to get the little mouse thing to work, but on the upper picture you can barely see the parapet of the historic building within the roof. And in the background you see the tall building, that's the office building for Palm Beach County. So sometimes you have to be very persuasive to get a historic building to be saved and reused, like for example in Stewart now with the old school, right? So in this case we brought several of the county commissioners up to the window and we said, come over here, take a look over here. You have a pointer? Oh, thank you so much. Wonderful. You see that right there? That's the parapet of the H that I told you. That's one corner of it. So we brought a couple of the commissioners to this window right here on the 12th floor and said, look at the H right down there. And they saw it and they gave us a little bit of money to go do a feasibility study. And then they funded the whole project. But we got lucky because we needed 4 votes, right? 4 to 3 votes, and we got 2. Addie Green was one of them, and I forgot who the 4th one was because they saw the building. They actually saw the building. So we did the study, we looked at everything from the hardwares to the doors, the corridors. We found a lot of the inside was in a lot better shape than the outside. We had to, Hedrick Brothers, the contractor, had to do demolition by hand first, the first 10 feet around the building, and then everything else was done with machinery. We actually, if you go on YouTube and look up 1916 Palm Beach County Courthouse, we did the whole 4-year process in 4 minutes. So you can actually see a little DVD pulling it apart, Hurricane Wilma coming by, putting it back together. It's kind of neat. and lots of things like these column pieces. We needed 12 columns. We ended up finding 11 3/4 columns laying in a yard at the airport. We needed 12. It's amazing, you know. And there they are, the capitals, you know, the Corinthian capitals. And they're the real columns, solid pieces of column.
Those were the original columns?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so we had 12 and 12 from both buildings, 24. 6 of them ended up being in the Lantana. There's a cemetery in Lantana. If you ever drive south by I-95, you'll see they've got 2, 4, 6 for the entry. We asked for the columns and they said, no, you can't have them back there. You gave them to us 35 years ago and they're part of our entry feature. We went down to Delray Beach. If you've been to Delray Beach, there's a courthouse in Delray Beach, has 1 column inside. I went to Audrey Wolf, our dear friend over there, and I said, can I take it out of the roof? And she said, no, it's going to cost too much money. So then we got the call and they found the 11 3/4 columns, and that the pieces all fit and worked was just a stroke of luck on this project. Here it is finished now in 2008. In fact, today at 4 o'clock, I couldn't make it. They were having a birthday cake for the 10-year anniversary. And it looks great. The only thing is the county needs to give the museum a little bit of money to replace the awnings. The awnings don't, the sun eats it up, and then awnings need to be replaced. But other than that, it has great patina like this building. Wonderful, wonderful to see how a building ages and gets its own character over time. This building has a wonderful feel to it. There it is with the Eagle too. Wonderful reconstruction of that. The brick, the limestone, and the granite down over here. The interiors too, we had photos. A historic preservation architect, when I speak to young people, I like to tell them it's like being a detective. You know, it's really fun. You get to be a detective. You really get to dig around and look for a beam. Like this place has these beautiful pegs. You don't see peg construction anywhere, you know, and that's a little detective feature about this building. You know, so the same thing with the historic building. You can go look around and find things. The flooring, the mosaic flooring that was basically covered under vinyl. The marble was covered in that old wood paneling that you'd see in your basement. Or they had shaggy orange carpet. Remember shaggy orange carpet? Everybody, I think, in this room is old enough to remember shaggy orange carpet, right? The stairs were missing. So part of being a detective is, well, where else did they build something like this? Voila, DeSoto County, 2.5 hours west of West Palm Beach, 1913, same architect, road trip, right? And we went over there. It's funny, we walk through the hallways, we go into the courtroom, the judge is practicing law inside the courtroom. It was just great, right? It's a cattle town. They haven't grown 6 million people. They probably had 100,000 and they now have 125,000, you know, I mean, something like that. So we were able to photograph and measure the newel posts and the railings. We had pictures of the historic lights. They had the historic lights. Everything, you know, who's going to change the design from 1913 to 1916? We were very fortunate to have that around to measure and use for our building. The HARRIET at City Place, if you're familiar with West Palm Beach has gone through a lot of revivals. It started in 1994, 1920s. After the war, it had a big boom. Then the suburbs came around, and the suburbs sucked the life out of the city. And this area was, at one point, I think it was on either Time magazine or NBC News. It was a cover story as the most dangerous, where Dana lives, the most dangerous, Cracktown, USA. You remember the title, right? Cracktown, you know, Belglades and Grandview Heights, Cracktown, USA. Unbelievable. And today, it's like tourism haven, and I live nearby, and lots of people live, work there, and it's an amazing place. So what a nice thing to be able to have a historic building in the middle, anchor $500 million worth of development. It would have been nice without a historic building, but it wouldn't have had a memory of place. It would have been a place maybe even soulless. It would have been like a new little, you know, back in 1998, 96, when the project was designed, you know, new urbanism was still not really catching on in infill development, right? In the new towns, yes, but in the infill, this was one of the early ones, I think, right? One of the very early ones. So it connects with the streets and all those good things, you know, but it had this historic building. We're really lucky to have a great client and vision from the politicians, right? And that's probably one of the biggest problems, you know, having been president of the Florida Trust, working at the Historical Commission, and it boils down to not even the planners or the Historic Preservation Board members, it boils down to the mayors. And the mayors or the county commissioners or the school board, because without their leadership, nothing gets done. In Boynton Beach, we had a mayor that wanted to tear down the building to do a parking lot. A parking lot, okay? So when you have people like that in leadership, you're going to get nowhere. Now, when you have, and it doesn't matter if you have money or no money, because the money always finds its way to do a project. It always does. But if there's no leadership there, it becomes a 10, 20-year project versus a 2 to 5 year project the way it should be. Nancy Graham had vision, she was bold, and she had leadership. She was a strong mayor. And that was the reason this got done. I remember in 96, 98, when the design competition began, she said to a whole bunch of developers from all over the world in the city hall, I have one requirement only. You reuse that building in some way. Go to town. They had proposals from architects, developers, to go all the way up to Clematis Street, right? Other people did it internally oriented. This one was the winner because they met with the community. They got input from the community. The charrette process, that we're familiar with. And they all respected the church, and the School of the Arts is over here, and they respected that situation of connecting, and that's really why they won, and they did a fabulous job in my opinion. Some of the pictures, this is missing, I don't have the slide yet, but there's a new hotel that's gone gangbusters over here. It's doing so well, they're proposing a second hotel behind it. And now with the hotel and the convention center, and the office building and the shops, it really does have everything going with it. The historic church is right over here. And it's now a performing arts center. You can see movies in there, you can see boxing, you can see jazz. I love in May, June, when the high school kids graduate, some of them will rent the place, and they put the red carpet and the limos come and the kids go up, and there's tuxedos up in there. It's kind of nice to see that kind of activity with a historic building. And this is what it looked like. It had a school that we had to tear down. Again, historic places have to change, you know, and how do you deal the best with the building? This portion was not workable for the design, so that portion of the school was torn down, and then we added a very small addition. I'm going to show you in a moment on the backside. These are some more of the historic pictures. There's a demolition going on. And this is now restored in 2000, some of the finished look. Believe it or not, the dumpsters and the delivery are right behind these little trees on the side over here. So we did a little hidden plaza to be able to, because it's a four-sided building, right? We talk about four-sided buildings all the time. And then people say, I can't do a four-sided building because I have the dumpster and the electrical. Yes, you can. You can definitely do that. It just takes your brain working a little bit more so you can design it, hide it in a way, and still have, on the primary elevation, create that little service area back over here. Next time you go to City Place, walk up to there, peek underneath the gates, and you'll see all the little dumpsters and all the stuff that you need for servicing a building. Here it is at nice. It's wonderful because it's the real soul, like Clematis Street, you know, and I love it. It's like, I like to compare it to Tampa, Ybor City, and Tampa downtown, right? Although this is better because this is walkable. It's actually a short walk from Clematis Street to City Place. Over there, the stretch is too much. But it's nice to have a historic district, Clematis Street, and a new district with a historic building in one city, you know, in our city of the region, right, which is West Palm Beach. These are the interiors. We did have to do some modifications in the front. We had to add bathrooms. We had to add ticket booths, you know, things that the church didn't have before. So again, you have to have flexibility, but it's how you design it. So we were inspired. We needed columns here to open up this wall, so we designed the columns inspired by the outside columns, you know, so we would do things like that, you know, that allowed us flexibility for the space. Everything is ADA accessible, like the courthouse, so it's flat instead of rake. You know, before things used to be rake when it was a church. Now it's usable, so they can have dining events on the mezzanine space. Lake Worth Casino was built recently in 2013, and it anchors the tourism side. It's the living room of Lake Worth. It's right on the beach. It's a beautiful location, surrounded by condominiums, and as you come down the main street of Lake Worth, it's terminated the view at the lake point. Here are some historic pictures of it. Wonderful, always the place that you take anybody from out of town, right? That's the other thing about historic places, right? That's where you want to take your friends, right? Right? I mean, Movico and go get ice cream, but wouldn't it be nice to take them, you know, to this building or a historic building? You know, so Lake Worth for decades, it was the heart and soul of Lake Worth, the casino. And then this happened. This is in the 1940s. And I'm not again, I love modern design. I love international design. I think mid-century modern MIMO is very popular now. It's very good. But there's a lot of good and there's a lot not so good. And what I've noticed too is that the period from the 1880s to like the 1930s, I'd say like 95% of the buildings were really good. They were really well designed. And then it just starts going down, and then we hit the 70s and 80s, and now I think it is kind of, you know, it's kind of forked into two paths, you know, but in this case, you know, they had this wonderful building, and they took all that detailing off. They took all the history. They left the columns. That's all they did, and everything else was a new building after there was a major hurricane, so they decided to go in the international style. But then they didn't take care of it, so it fell apart. It was really falling apart. By 2000, it should have been shut down. They kept it open for another 6 years, and they finally had to shut it down when the concrete just started falling. So we researched the historic building, and we proposed, this was a design competition in 2010 when there was like no work, and we proposed designing the portion that was the historic, refer to the historic design, and then the other piece, the longer piece to the south, make it more like a cousin, you know, not even a brother or a sister, but make it a little bit different so that when people would come by today, and today when you come by there, you see this is a building based on a 1920s historic building. And this one is Italian too, but it's different, you know, so that you don't confuse it. We did the same thing at City Place, where the new addition is on the south side of City Place. The proportions, the rhythms, the stucco, the paint, even the paint colors are different. So when you look at the building, you see the differentiation. Why? Because why create a false sense of history? Why not design it so that when our grandkids come here 20, 40, 50 years from now, they can look at the building and say, there's the church at City Place, there's 1924. Oh, that's the piece they built in 2000. Instead of what some architects like to do is they'll do the whole thing historic, right? And then where's the original and where's the addition from 2000 or whatever the year is. So similar but different is something that we practice in our office. This is what it looked like when we started. So you can see that it did have a little bit of the history left, right? And here are some of the columns. They had been taped up. I don't know why they did that to the columns. They just covered all the capitals, but they're beautiful little simple capitals. We did find a couple. And then we got into the construction phase. Boy, you talk about being a detective and being surprised. So we start pulling everything apart and the building starts crumbling. So we got a testing lab. We just had to do testing at the Boynton Beach High School, by the way, and because it had some issues on loading, you know, because of some changes from being a school to being a community center. The building codes require you to make it stronger, right? But here it was falling apart. So we tested the sand and the concrete mix, and guess what they did in the 1920s? They used the sand from the beach. And it's happened. I've seen a couple of, not very frequently, but I have heard other people in other buildings run into this problem. So the whole thing had to be torn down to the foundations and then reconstructed. And you want to talk about a political nightmare, because this was a design-build package. We had promised the citizens that we were going to restore the building. And then a lot of people got upset because there wasn't nothing to restore. It was a reconstruction. So it took a long time after it opened for the naysayers to say, okay, it's a reconstruction. This is a reconstruction, but it's really nice. You know, you have a nice building there on the beach, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's been built to last for a long time. Here are some photos under construction. And there it is today. It's got wonderful views. This is on the cousin portion of the building down there. Just frame the view, you know, just create little architectural opportunities, you know, for young people and for anybody. You're there for a wedding or you're there for a special event. There's a ballroom of about 300 people. You just look at and you take the time to frame a view, right? We're always in such a hurry. I love walking around that building too. I'm not, you know, I know most of it is not MAR-A-LAGO, but still it's kind of nice that it has different things and different views around the building. Part two is now projects that are under design or construction. And they're all very exciting projects. We have had different roles. In some cases, in Midtown, we came in and helped them first because they had several historic homes on the property. And the Delray Beach Historic Society was very upset because they were moving the houses like a game of chess. And so we came in and got involved. And we were criticized for that. And just recently, I think maybe with Dana last week, I was telling, you know, Dana was like, well, why did you know, yeah, with Dana, because remember I had to go one night down to Delray. And I said, you know why, Dana? Because sometimes it's better to get involved with a client that's going in the wrong direction, a project's going in the wrong direction, to either make it better or hopefully steer it, you know, to get into the right direction. And we accomplished that at the last, when it got approved 2 o'clock in the morning last week, the mayor said, you know, and great mayor, Carrie Glickstein, and a visionary mayor, said, we got to work on this front building facing Atlantic, which was the only building that we had. There were 17 buildings on this property. 8 of them are historic. So 9 of them are new buildings. We had already redesigned 6 of them. So he basically said, the last one that you haven't touched, we want you to redesign it. And they approved the project. So that happens, and that's why I think good architects and good urbanists and good preservationists should get involved, even in difficult projects, because sometimes after, you tire them out, right? You get involved with them, you know, you tell them, no, let's do it different, and hopefully after they hit their head the developer on the wall 500 times, and you start winning little battles, you can maybe get them, convince them to move and do the right thing for the community. Old Boynton Beach is a wonderful project, but it took 18 years, 8 studies, 18 years. Our first study was a month after 9/11. I'll never forget that. My dad did a rendering, we did a design, didn't go anywhere. That was the mayor that wanted to tear down the building. The Sunset Lounge is a wonderful project in an African-American neighborhood. It got 2 grants from the state of Florida. And Love Street Sunny Sands in Jupiter is a project inspired by history, by St. Augustine, by Nantucket, and by the old boathouse that was on the property. So let me run you through some of these pictures too. Midtown, a very important location in the city of Delray Beach. This is Atlantic Avenue, and that's Swinton. So Midtown is in an area that has not seen any redevelopment because it's the beginning of the African-American neighborhood to the west of the set, which is to the west. It touches everything else that's been done. Have you all been to Delray Beach? I think maybe, hopefully, you've been to Delray. It's thriving, right? It's very popular. There's a historic hotel on the main street. There's a lot of new buildings. But everything to the southwest has not had the opportunities that have occurred to the north, to the east, and to the southeast, too. Very challenging property. These are the houses. There's 6 on this block. This green one was one that was basically torn apart, falling apart over here, but had great bones, and we convinced the developer to rebuild it and put it here next to the Sunday house. And this was a house that was on the property at an angle over here that was relocated from West Palm Beach. Delray has a great history of relocating and saving buildings. You think we went in there and we were proposing the most evil thing we could have ever done with a historic property. And we remind them over and over again, but you've done 18 of these. You actually have a history, you have a reputation across the state of Florida of saving historic places. Because you know it makes sense, sometimes you have to pick up a house and move it, you know? So these 3 stayed in the same exact spot. These 3 were slightly moved on this block, which is the most controversial block. Here they were just happy that they got the reconstruction next to the Sunday, and they were okay with that one. The other problem in a place like Delray Beach, when you have historic districts next to central business districts, something I learned working on this project for the last 2.5 years, you gotta be careful with what you ask for. You know, sometimes, and Treasure Coast came in and fixed a lot of things in Delray Beach. And Delray Beach is very lucky they have Anthea working for them now, who used to work for Treasure Coast. But before all that happened, they put a overlay district right over here, okay, for the central business district that cuts in half the historic district. The historic district's very long and narrow. And right over here on these blocks is all central business. So you have a huge central business district of 4-story, massive buildings coming to the site on the east and then cutting through the site right at the middle between both neighborhoods. So what happens was now you have the conflict of allowing 4-story buildings to restart the neighborhood next to historic 1- and 2-story buildings. You know, very, very difficult thing to do. What we propose is, well, let's bring back the streetscape. There are 5 historic homes right across the street from here. And we said it's better to take this block, just like Duane would always say, applying some of the new urbanism principles to historic preservation. And I love the symbiosis there, because you can say, you know, how you have a house facing a house, or, you know, building the building. Let's do that with historic preservation. Let's put historic buildings facing historic buildings, you know. There's a 2-story building over here, historic. Let's put the 2-story new building here, and then the 4-story here, and there are some 4 stories over here. So trying to do that relationship and trying to bring back the historic character of that portion. This is what that streetscape will look like when it's built. It looks pretty nice, right? I think it looks pretty nice. You know, you get 6 historic homes and landscaping, and okay, except for one big thing. We have an underground parking deck under these 6 houses, right? And there's a lot of gas probably in the audience. Oh my God. Well, I had the city manager of St. Augustine come down and look at this project. Because guess what? Parking is a big problem in great areas. I called you looking for parking space today, right? That's a good problem, to have parking problems. That's always a good problem. But you have to find very creative ways of solving them. In Love Street, we did what's called liner buildings. We did small 2- and 3-story buildings with historic scale, hiding the parking garage above ground. Here, we're proposing one level of underground parking over that entire block. It has not been done before. Yes, our state capitol has parking underground. Yes, the Capitol up in Washington, D.C. just did a $250 million underground project under the Capitol, but nobody's done parking underneath historic buildings. Now, when we take the buildings out, they all have bad foundations. They all need to be restored anyways. We're going to put them back at the same elevation. So in other words, they're three feet off the ground. They're all going to be back up at the same elevation, except instead of sitting on concrete piers and landscaping, they're going to be sitting on the top concrete deck of a one-level garage, right? No big deal. Well, if we pull it off, and I think we will, it's going to be a game changer for historic districts. You go to St. Augustine now, St. George's, there's no parking. They built a very large parking garage on the north side of St. Augustine, and they hate it, because it separates all the neighborhoods to the north, right, from the core of St. Augustine. So if you can figure out a way to maybe bury some of this parking and then either put infill buildings, liner buildings, or put restored historic buildings, maybe that's a way that we deal with it. And maybe we won't need parking for a long time, right? We've already been talking about how the cars are coming in, Uber, bikes, we might not need to be building so many parking spaces. The houses have wonderful character, right? Just like up here in Stewart and in Jensen Beach, just a wonderful variety. This is the Cathcart house, the most important one, and the little French house that's been sitting neglected for a long time. We're going to take off all the unsympathetic additions that have been built on the time, and we're going to do a complete restoration of all 8 of the houses. And then, of course, there are the larger buildings, 2 and 4 stories. This is the one where we're going to take a floor off, thanks to the mayor, and redesign. This is the one we did not design this building. This is 4-story hotel next to the 4-story district that we designed, and then we stepped it down, 4-story to 3-story to 2-story on Swinton. And even the 2-story design, we broke it on plan, so there's actually 2. It's hard to see in this rendering, but there's a frontage right there, right? And the other one is over here, so they kind of looks like 2 smaller buildings. So breaking down the scale in historic districts, how can you break down the scale and use that as a tool to help it fit a little bit bigger and give it a buffer from the bigger buildings on the property and then the big buildings just a block to the east in the central business district of Delray. Old Boynton Beach, just last night, a $120 million project got approved. Ours is the $10 million building in the middle of the historic building. It's an amazing place. There are 3 historic buildings in Boynton Beach. The old school, which is a children's museum, the old high school, which has been neglected for over 20 years, and the women's club on US 1 that was designed by Addison Meisner, the only public building he ever did while he was working. So 3 buildings. And they were going to tear this one, right? Because the mayor didn't like the facade. He thought it wasn't the right facade. He's no longer the mayor, which is great. They have a 38-year-old young mayor, and Steve Grant, right? And they have new commissioners, and the moment they got all elected, the first thing they did was we're saving that building. Remember Nancy Graham, right? In 1998, in 2016. Another leadership, young people came up and said, we don't really care what you end up doing around it, you're saving that building, right? So I hope that stays with everyone, that we can use that. And it's a beautiful building. We did a lot of detective work on it. I don't know why it's moving. Must be the train is going by. Right? I'm like, Jesus, Flagler. So so what was very interesting, and Mr. Mann designed this building. He was very well known in Palm Beach County for doing schools. He did part of the Dreyfus. He did Canal Point, the school that was burned to the ground, on beautiful building in Little Old Canal Point. He's done a lot of school buildings. But he did this in the late 20s, or almost at the beginning, in a time when Spanish was very popular. He added Art Deco to the building. And I know it's hard to tell in the elevation over here, but if you look at these, especially if you walk on site, if you look at these pieces with the parapets, the horizontal lines with the verticality, and then he has the Spanish in the middle, and then the gymnasium in the back, it's really an interesting blend of a little bit of Art Deco. Like Art Deco is coming next, right? So I've looked at Miami Beach too to see, did anybody ever do Spanish Mediterranean with a touch of Art Deco, and I haven't found that. So if anybody finds one of those buildings, please let me know. I think Mr. Mann was onto something there. And again, you can see the Art Deco shapes even better. You can see some of it over here, the step back and all of that on that portion of the building. And it really sad when government doesn't take care of its buildings. You know, how can you expect a private property owner to take care of their buildings if you, as a government, don't take care of your public buildings? It's embarrassing. It should have cost $6 million to do this project. We're spending $10 million because for the last 18 years, holes in the roof. And after Irma came through, the entire roof, I want to show you a picture now, all the roof decking had to be removed. We had beautiful wood beams and steel beams. The only thing left is the steel. All the wood has to be new because all the wood rotted from all the water damage. But yesterday they approved a $100 million project, so I'm not complaining, hopefully not complaining too much about Boynton Beach. It's amazing that they're doing a town center like City Place around the old school. It's going to be very exciting to watch that over the next couple of years. This is some of the disrepair. Unfortunately, the water damage even ruined the wood floors that we had in the gym. That's going to be an auditorium. Here's a drawing my dad did back in 9/11. A beautiful little building. And here's how it sits in one of the concepts that before the developer got on board with Jeff Harden. In fact, Jeff was, just like he's trying to save the school here, the school, they were going to tear this building down. I was at a board meeting at the Florida Trust, and I was so mad, and we were so mad at the board meeting. We said, we got to do something. So I went to the city and said, I'll spend my own money with my own staff, give me 3 months, and I'll figure out a way to get this building done. So they stopped the demolition from September to December. And December come around, I've met with 3 or 4 developers, and they can't make the numbers work, and I'm like, oh crap, what am I going to do now? I remember I heard Jeff Harden at a Lake Worth meeting say he was looking for investing in a historic building somewhere. So I called Jeff up and said, are you still looking for a historic project building? And he said yes. And he came down there and he committed up to $2 million to save the building. So we saved the building. Then we started working on the project, and then the big aircraft carrier came, which was the big developer that wanted to do the $100 million town center like City Place around it. So we folded. We just went in. Jeff and I went in and took our little project and put it as phase 1 of this bigger project. So it was interesting because we showed them what they could do. You know how they could do a variety of, they're doing a hotel, apartments, senior housing, new life. City Hall, parking structures. Really interesting. I think even better than City Place because it's bringing in the civic component. City Place doesn't have a city hall or a library involved in it. City Hall and the library are on Clematis. But all of those elements, public and private, are going to be right smack in the middle of this project. Not designed like that, in a different design, but it's great that they're doing that. The school, again, programming the school, like we did for the Stewart High School. How do you use the classrooms for rental space, for incubator office? And the old gym is going to be a theater for 500 seats. And then some other things like for ballet class and art kilns and other uses, very similar to what we want to try to accomplish with Martin County here at Stewart High School. These are some pictures from last year, believe it or not, and these are yesterday. Okay? So imagine I walked in there and I talked to the super, well, what happened? He goes, well, there were 34 beams, and you can see there's a couple of them left, like these beams over here. And of the 34, only 7 were not rotted out from all the damage. So we kept the 7, but we're doing all new beams. And it's hard to see the pictures here, but they just finished. You see how dark it is in the back of stage? They just finished the new decking there, and it's beautiful. It's just great to see that. We're going to paint it red, and we're going to have the decking stain, and we're going to have this kind of air conditioning exposed, and it's going to be just as beautiful as this space is. The Sunset Lounge in West Palm Beach is in the African American neighborhood. It's been very neglected for years. It was the heart and soul of music in West Palm Beach for many decades. It's in an area where the city is talking about the Rosemary Spine. If you're familiar with Rosemary, that's the main north-south street that goes to City Place. So imagine if you took Rosemary up to Clematis Street, right, which goes east-west, and then if you're brave enough to go another 7 blocks north, that's where this building is. But, you know, it was scary at City Place 20 years ago, right, Hank? It was not a safe place. So the same thing is going to happen, I think, in the next 3 to 5 years. The Northwest neighborhood and the Sunset Lounge are going to transform this neighborhood. There's a very strong church base in the community, historic churches that have built new buildings right about here. There's 3 of them, and this is the 4th building that's missing right now, which we're going to restore. It includes the rest of the block for parking, for an addition, for a plaza. The city has demolished these buildings here, and that's going to be a jazz park. And then you see the little shotgun houses over here? They're going to bring other shotgun houses and make it into like a little arts village there. So they'll have artists, the park for jazz events, the 3-story building. The addition will have a broadcast station, all sorts of activity based on arts and music in the neighborhood. The neighborhood has been extremely engaged in the process. We believe strongly that you have to do community planning. You have to bring in the people that live in the neighborhood so they become a part of it and they don't just turn their back on it and say, oh, they stole our building. No, this is their building. They're going to activate it and use it. It was built as a garage shop in the 20s. Very quickly, it turned into a lounge in the 30s and 40s. They enclosed the top and they put a balcony in. Count Basie played there. We did some work up in Fort Pierce. On Avenue D, there's a very similar theater in Avenue D. You know the building in Fort Pierce for Miss Benson. Her father owned that building. Same idea, you know, to bring back that mezzanine. There's the roof like this one, and then bring back the concerts and a restaurant on the ground floor. That's what it looks like today. There's the building with a new addition. It's secondary to the primary. It's set back. It brings bathrooms, kitchens. We talked about kitchens, have full kitchen, bathrooms, all the things. The broadcasting booth is going to be over here, and all the things that you need to make it a usable building for events of all types. There are the floor plans, the 3 floors. There's the, yes? So who's paying for all of this? Okay, so like at City Place, certain smart developers came in and bought pieces around a project when they hear that the city or the government's doing a project. So they had to get bought out. So the CRA, John Ward, we're very lucky. We have a guy in our CRA named John Ward. He used to run the Fort Pierce CRA. Out of the box thinker, always trying to find the way to do it. He convinced the city to pay $3.5 million for the property. But we went to the state of Florida, and we've now received 2 years in a row, $500,000. So he got $1 million already for the project. And it's going to be another $3.5 million to finish. It's a $7 million project. So the CRA, because there's money that's being made in the neighborhood and downtown, they can then take those dollars from the CRA and invest it, right, into a project. And that's what CRAs are great for. We're trying to help Palm Springs become a CRA in Palm Beach County. And I know some of the CRAs on the west coast of Florida have been rogue, and the legislators want to shut down all the CRAs, but that's a mistake. And, you know, CRAs have a great purpose in revitalizing our historic communities and helping bringing in new development into our cities. Look at this, how interesting, whoa. It's shaking, but it's got a bow truss just like the other building, right? It has a little bow ceiling just like the high school in Boynton Beach. This is selective demolition, just started 2 weeks ago. So it's a little bit behind it. Love Street and Sunny Sands, boy, this is what happens like when you have a place that has no place, you know, so where we went in with Victor Dover, wonderful new urban planner, 3 years ago. Huge parking lots, huge, your typical, I bet you have some of these over here too, right? I know downtown Stewart has that restaurant that's right on the water and then lots of parking, right? So it's not connected. I remember when we came here for Christmas, those 3 or 4 days, we stayed in the bed and breakfast, and then you walk to the restaurant. It was the only place open on Christmas night, right? But then you didn't want to walk to the west because it was a big parking lot. You know, it didn't feel like, what's over there? There's nothing over there. So the village is something that the CRA wanted to turn into a village, the Inlet Village in Jupiter. And they're hoping that this project will be Love Street over here and Sunny Sands over here, and the historic reconstruction, because these hurricanes totally destroyed the building. So luckily we measured it, we drew it up before the hurricanes came, the last 2, Matthew and Irma. And so that's a total reconstruction. But fine, you know, they're actually letting us do that. And I was shocked, and Jupiter let us do that. So if there's a good historic building, there's a chance they'll let you, you know, rebuild it and bring it back. There's where it sits. It's got topography, so there's an inn and some other buildings, some cottages, some restaurant spaces. It's all in the planning phase still. There is the historic building. This is the historic portion, and this is the new portion because we needed an elevator to get all the way to the roof deck and the second floor, and we needed restrooms. So we have that, but we designed it in a way that complements the historic building. This is the Love Street, which is a block away, using historic architecture to define the place and design it. We took the parking lot and we put these cheekies. So there's shade parking during the week, you know, when people come to eat lunch or work there. But on the weekends, they can be spots for people to sell arts and crafts and things like that. It becomes more of an interactive space. And we have a little bit of a beach, and we tie into the boardwalk, this beautiful boardwalk. Jupiter's done a great job putting in a, buildings aren't that great, but the boardwalk is really great in Jupiter. They've been watered down, unfortunately. And this is a view of arriving by boat. Okay, and then the last part, and then we'll open it up for some questions, are two projects on the boards, you know, things that we've been involved with in the very recent past. The first one, the brewery, TOD, we just worked on that last week. So thank you, Kim and Dana for letting me sneak some of those renderings in here. And the old Stewart High School, we've been working on that with Nancy and with Hank and Jeff since November, late November of last year. So here's this place, North Miami. I think it's just a contrast of things, right? Because it has a great grid, but it has these super highways that have been dropped into there. And then it has, I'm a naturalist too. I love to go kayaking and go in the water, and it's got these great waterways. So one of our thoughts, and it's got this snake canal, you know, that goes up to this other large lake that you see on I-95 when you drive by. So we felt like water to water, there was a great opportunity there. And the snake canal, you know, we had one of our friends on the charrette calling it the Canale de Serpente, right? That's amazing, right? You changed it, right? We changed the name of something, and boom, there's your marketing plan, right, for the place. So I got to thank Andrew for that one, you know. But you can see the site. There's a lot of it's empty area. There's one wonderful historic brewery. It used to be the gas company. It's all gas company land. 1920s brick vernacular structure. There's a rail line, and there's that massive Biscayne Boulevard and 163rd Street, which is another massive street. And they have a nice little downtown grid over here with great potential. And the same thing with the Snake Canal and this part of downtown over here. They have FIU has a campus down here on the south side, and there's a courthouse over here, but none of those people have an easy way of crossing. They get killed crossing. I don't know how Kim got all four corners done, but she did it, and she's alive and here today. But it would be taking your hand, you're putting your life in your hands if you try to cross that street. So, these things over here? This is the water treatment plant for all of northern Miami-Dade County. So what do? They took the nature area, right? And they just carved it out of the nature area and they dropped it in there. That's the way we used to plan. So here we just spent a little bit of time at the charrette just last week, you know, so where can we drop a train station? And we all came to the point too that because Biscayne Boulevard is such a, we called it an F street, right? We failed it, right? It's just horrible. There's no way, we always want to try to get a pedestrian crossing. I think it's the first charrette, Kim, in 30 years where I think I've acknowledged from day one, ain't no way we're going to cross that as a pedestrian. So we said, okay, but we can have some fun with it. We could do a gateway kind of crosswalk. It doesn't have to be, you know, an ugly crosswalk like at the Palm Beach County Courthouse. You know, it could be something, you know, fun to get you across the street and help all those people on the east side get over here to the west side. So we dropped the train station right where the road pinches over here, and it meets 159th, and this is an existing part of the downtown. And we started to propose some new buildings, different ways of connecting and existing streets and tying them into new streets, urban neighborhood, and even jumping the tracks. You know, one thing that they do a lot in Miami is they go all the way, right? So they're going big, well, we're going to go big, and we're going to show them how to do big. You know, so we said, well, jump the building over the tracks, just as a design exercise. But what was important was that that building became a backdrop building, you know, not a design building, which is the problem, right? That they allow the historic building to really shine in the project. So when you're driving, this view over here is driving or walking this way. You see the train station, there's the train station, and you get a peek of the backside of the historic brewery, of this historic gas company that'll be a brewery. And so why not? Why not anchor new cities and new towns, and especially transit-oriented development? You know, we have this fragile 10-mile wide, 100-mile long place that we all love. You know, I lived in Miami, I grew up in Miami, I've lived 30 years in Palm Beach County. I tell Brigitte I always love coming up this way because it's so much nicer up here. But if you have to communicate and travel, why not take a train and get off at a train station and create special places? And you turn to your left and you see a historic building, right? Instant anchoring of a place. There's instant history connectivity there, right? Well, what is that building? Well, it was the old gas company, and it did this and it did that, and it's a brewery right now. And it anchors all new urban development and additional buildings. And maybe that plaza in that park has another building, another two-story building, a restaurant. So you have like these two competing structures, a historic one and a new one, and you can have outdoor events. And maybe the plaza has stages so they can have festivals there, you know, and one stage on one side and one stage on the other. Battle of the bands, right, with the historic building and the new building, all anchored by a beautiful train station in the middle. And these are some other views. This is flying north on a helicopter over that horrible street. And you see the train station over here. This was a different concept where we moved the train station to the north. And this one's where the train station is currently proposed, which is on the bend with the historic building and the new building. And last but not least, the old school here in Stewart, in downtown. That's the historic portion. There's a lot of other things going on that campus. It's a great location, right? The east side of Stewart. What a great opportunity to help downtown continue to grow, not only to fill in this part of downtown, but also to the east over here, with the hospital and with all the other things going around in that part of, and the school and the cultural center and everything else going on in that part. It's very walkable, very easy to walk, but there has to be something there for us to walk to. Beautiful Art Deco building from the 1930s. The school board wanted to knock it down. Right, Hank? The first time we went to see them, right? It was on their scrapbook. They had hired an architect, and a big-time architect that does big-time schools. Knock it down. It doesn't meet the footprint. It's 10,000 square feet, 3 stories. It's awkward. It's set back. It should be in front. And knock it down. Why knock it down? You know, it's a beautiful building with a lot of history. When we finished the HARRIET at City Place, Dale Hedrick was the contractor. He was the last person to get married in that Methodist church in that building. And he would tell me, seniors would come up to him crying, saying, "Thank you for restoring this building. I went to church there. I got married there." Same thing when we did the courthouse too. Karen Marcus, the commissioner, she was in the secretarial pool in the 60s and 70s. She was horrified when they did the wraparound. She remembered it before the wraparound. So historic places bring a lot of memory to a community. So save every historic building and try to find a new economically viable purpose for them. And I think we did. We found a way to save the buildings. These are the historic. Maybe do an artist loft community behind here. Maybe do a governmental building of some sort or an office building, and then tuck a small parking structure behind it to allow for that. It has a lot of potential. I really do hope. I wish Nancy well. I hope that we can pull this off. So it's very bushy right now. There's a lot of trees. You don't see it. That's fine. We're not going to get hung up with the trees, right, Hank? We're going to put royal palm trees so you can see the building, right? These are simple things that we can do, just like renaming a canal, right? Do some renderings that show a different view of the building so people can get engaged and buy into the project. And these are very important type of renderings too, because look what you can do. The outdoor space can become a sculpture garden. We did that for the Palm Beach Cultural Council in downtown Lake Worth with their Art Deco building. They got a yard behind and they now have a sculpture garden. It's unbelievable what these places do. In Lake Worth, the restaurants are busier, Starbucks are busier. When we go to the openings, they have openings every month. There's 100, 200 people show up to these openings, and then they walk to the restaurants and the art galleries down the street, you know. It's such simple economics. You know, it's a shame it's not like a mandatory, even in new town planning, right, that they do these kind of buildings, you know, to allow for economic well-being of a community. The floor plans work great. They're very conceptual, but you know, you can have shops in the one-story mid-century modern buildings. In the Art Deco building, you can have breakout spaces. And then up on the 3rd floor, you can have a wonderful a space like this on that 3rd floor. And then in closing, I'm also asked, especially after the Colombia trip, what is available to help? Well, I can't help in Colombia, but in Florida, we have a lot of good things, and there are other programs, but the University of Florida sit on the board where they manage 35 historic properties in St. Augustine. And that's an important board because they've taken a liability from the city, and the state owns the properties. The city was managing it without money, and now the university has come in and is managing it. The government house, if you've been up there, we recently finished restoring the government house. It's also an interactive center. It has a museum, it's interactive, it's very busy now, it's very vibrant. People are getting married in the courtyard there, it's being put back to use, and that's all with the university's leadership. The Florida Trust is celebrating 40 years this year. We're having our conference in Jacksonville in May. May is Historic Preservation Month. I encourage all of you, my CNU friends, to attend too, right? Because we're just brothers, and we have to, get together a history with new urbanism. And I lead the advocacy part of historic preservation. I'll go anywhere in the state of Florida on my own time to fight to save a building. And that's just something that I have a nice practice. It's 30 years old, and I've made a commitment now for the last piece of my career to just be able to do that, because there are too many hired guns on the other side, too many slick lawyers, too many slick developers, too many slick architects demolishing historic places, because it's so much easier to work with a white piece of paper. And that happened at the Bel Air Hotel in the west coast of Florida. 750,000 square foot wood constructed historic building, all of this type of construction, torn down because the developer wanted to put 6 cookie cutter condo buildings. And we came up pro bono with different ideas, a hotel, a condominium, a senior, portions of it, because it was very large. Same thing in Miami with the Miami Herald. We went down to help with the Miami Herald. 750, another monster building. Beautiful mid-century modern building, built like a tank, because they had to roll in the paper for the printers at the newspaper. Torn down because they were going to build this humongous Malaysian casino thing. Drive by it today, it's still an empty piece of land. That building is gone forever. So advocacy is very important in Florida, to even small buildings, from our little buildings to our large buildings. And then the Florida Division of Historical Resources. The governor put me on that board, and we do what's called the Florida Historical Commission and the National Register, which is what Michael was making fun of me. I'm not on the register.
No, actually,
I help.
I thought you were registered.
I help with any building that wants to get registered, become a national register, comes through our board, and I'm the architect on the board that gives the architectural input. We have a historian, we have a archaeologist, myself, 5 of us that meet, and then we give them the input on, yes, send it up to DC, or no, kick it back to Miami, or kick it back to wherever it is. And in closing, we have 2 Facebook pages, REG Architects, and if you really like historical places like I do, I gave a lecture in Sanford 3 years ago to Christine Dalton, who's the preservation planner there, and she says, you should do something on Facebook. I said, all right, I'll do something on Facebook. We have over 850 members on this group, and we just love to share ideas of historic projects, because something is going up in Jacksonville might help somebody here in Jensen Beach, or something in Jensen Beach can help somebody in Naples, right? It's that idea of which new urbanists and preservationists do. We like to cross-pollinate, and that's a wonderful way of doing the built environment, historic and new. And so thank you very much, Michael, for the invitation.